With the 21st pick in the 2014 NFL Draft, the Green Bay Packers select Ha-Ha Clinton-Dix.
It's time for the Packers War Room Podcast.
Made me a believer into really thinking that the Packers really could run the table, and that was when I said right away, they're winning the NFC North.
The bomb to Jordy Nelson was just a moment that I'll never forget. For him to be able to get behind the corner and really just catch the prayer, essentially, was just quintessential Packers 2016.
Like I said, for this team to win 2 playoff games was just astounding with how beat up they were and the state of their defense, really.
And now, alongside Jacob Westendorf and Cody Bauer, here's your host of the Packers War Room Podcast, Ross Uglem.
That's right. I am Ross Uglem. We got to thank our friend Fish from Bison 1660 in Fargo, North Dakota, for the fresh new intro. You heard that, of course, on the first episode, but something that we haven't recorded since we were able to receive, so we want to give him thanks and shout out to him. But I am joined, as always, by Jacob Westendorf. Jacob, how's it going?
Thanks, Fish. Thanks, Ross. Excited to be here, talk some more drafts, second time around. Super Bowl week here, so excited to be back talking some Packers.
And, as always, Cody Bauer.
What's up, guys? Awesome night to be doing all the podcasting with you.
And as the fresh new intro indicated, this is the Packers War Room Podcast. We are going to be here to discuss the NFL Draft, to discuss the Packers offseason, as the quest for that elusive 5th Super Bowl continues on during the Aaron Rodgers era. So we took care of running backs last week. We took care of quarterbacks last week. We are going to dive into the running back position at this time. But before we get specifically into this class, I want to talk about like a conceptual thing. And I'll start with Cody. Is there such a thing as a round 1 running back need?
Honestly, I don't think so. There's been several cases of teams drafting a running back early and then not paying any kind of dividends. Some people might point to the Cowboys and saying that it did pay off, but ultimately they didn't get to the big game this weekend. You look at other teams like the Saints trading their whole entire draft for Ricky Williams. Other guys going. Doug Martin is just kind of a guy now in Tampa Bay. He was traded back up into the first to get him. Just the list goes on of guys who, it's almost like the final piece. It's the final cherry on top of a sundae. If your roster is completely filled out, then I think you can go get your stud back in the first round. But I don't think there's going to be an NFL team like that now or next year or any really year in the future. There's just the salary cap era. There's too many other needs for teams, too many other important positions that they need to fill. Protecting the quarterback, and getting after the quarterback all play precedent over a running back who, again, on the flip side of guys not always working out in the first, you can get guys in the middle rounds or even late rounds that can have success in this league if you got a good offensive line. So for me, there's really not a such thing as a running back need in the first round.
Jacob, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Cody kind of pointed it out a little bit. I'll go a little bit further, but a lot of everybody's counter argument is the Dallas Cowboys and how they went from 4th pick in the draft to best record in the NFC because of Ezekiel Elliott. And really the counter argument to that is one and done in the playoffs, and one game shouldn't really discredit an entire season worth, but one season also shouldn't change an entire drafting philosophy either. If the argument the Cowboys and their fan base always has is they could plug anybody behind that offensive line and run for 1,000 or 1,200 yards, and that was proven true in the 2015 season. Darren McFadden's corpse ran for 997 yards behind that offensive line the previous year. Just didn't get to 1,000 because he missed a little bit of time that year. The other argument I have is they took Ezekiel Elliott 4th overall, and they didn't pick Jalen Ramsey because of it. Okay. In the 5th round, the Chicago Bears took Jordan Howard, who was one of my favorite running backs in this draft class. He finished 2nd in the league in rushing. That is a wide gap. The Cowboys easily could have taken a member of their secondary, beef that up. They got a ton of guys coming off the books in the secondary now this year. Jordan Howard would have done just as well behind that offensive line. This is no disrespect to Ezekiel Elliott, who I think is one of the 2 or 3 best running backs in all of football, but you just don't take that guy, in my opinion, in the first round, and especially not in the top 5. But overall, running back, not a big need in the first couple rounds, especially not in the first round.
I think you're exactly right, and I think you don't need to really look any further than the Final Four. You had the Packers, who were starting a third-round pick, a late third-round pick, wide receiver at running back. The Falcons, who have mid-round guys in Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman that are among the top 1-2 picks in the 1-2 punches in the entire league. Not 1 or 2 picks, but 1 or 2 punches in the entire league. You have the Steelers, who are led by a mid-second round pick in Le'Veon Bell. I would say the best running back in football at this time when healthy, and then the New England Patriots, who are literally just adding cast-offs to play at running back. Dion Lewis, James White, LeGarrette Blount, these are just undrafted guys, or guys that their old team let them go. I mean they're devaluing the running back position almost more than the Packers are. So I just don't think you need to look any further than the 4 most successful teams in the NFL this season, and that'd be Atlanta, Green Bay, New England, and Pittsburgh. That's the blueprint for me. I have no real issue taking a running back in the first round if it is an unbelievable value. Like this morning, I released my second FanSpeak mock, and Dalvin Cook, who I would prefer Leonard Fournette. You guys are actually on the Cook train, but this is a guy who is a top 12 probably player for me. And the way the board fell, he was available at 29, so I took him. You can take him, but even if running back is the weakest position on your team, you don't need to take one in round 1. It's just it's really irresponsible drafting, in my opinion, to definitely ever reach for a running back in the first 30 picks. That's something that I would not do. Cody put it best. This league's about passers, pass catchers, pass defenders, and pass rushers, baby. There is a game this weekend. As much as we would probably like to pretend that there isn't, I have kind of a habit of the times in my life that the Packers have made the NFC Championship and not advanced to the Super Bowl. I've had a hard time watching the game. Don't really pay much attention to it. Pay more attention to the festivities that go on around it. But this is a football podcast, so let's talk a little bit of football and give our Super Bowl predictions. I actually, I said this before, the Seahawks played the Broncos a couple years back in the Super Bowl, and I'm going to say it again. I don't actually think this season the AFC is real football. I didn't think the Pittsburgh Steelers were very good. I am not convinced the New England Patriots are very good. I think Seattle is going to score, I think Atlanta is going to score a lot more than people think they are. That New England defense that's first in scoring is not even close to that in DVOA, and it's because they haven't played anybody. They get to play Buffalo, Miami, and the Jets twice, and that really helps your scoring defense average. I think people are going to be surprised at what happens to the Patriots in this game. My final score prediction, I'll say Atlanta 38, New England 28. Jacob?
Definitely surprising. I said last night on Pulse of the Pack, I think that a lot of people are writing Atlanta off, and I think that that's foolish because the Falcons are – I mean, this is an offense that scored more points than the greatest show on turf. And we're not talking about this offense as one of the greatest offenses of all time, and I don't know if that's because it's Matt Ryan and the narrative that surrounds him, or if that's because Atlanta is a terrible sports town, or if it's because they played the Seahawks, who have more buzz than they do because of their historically great defense, or because they played the Packers, who have Aaron Rodgers, who's one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, and now they're playing Tom Brady, who's one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. Whatever the reason is, I'm not sure. But I do know that whether, Ross, you make a compelling argument And I agree with you to some degree. At the same time, 2 weeks for Bill Belichick to prepare for somebody. Bill Belichick, in my opinion, in my lifetime, is the greatest coach I've ever seen. And that matters to me to some degree. The scheme and stuff that he can come up with, I think that he'll take away enough of Julio Jones. They'll do enough against the run of Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. They haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher all season long. I think the Falcons will score points, but I do think that they also will give up enough points. Patriots 35, Falcons 31, and a thriller. I actually think it's going to be a really great game. But I wouldn't be surprised one bit if I was wrong and it was flipped the other way around and the Falcons won. But I do like New England with that extra week to prepare. Just think that the veteran pulls through here, and the best coach that I've ever seen with that extra week matters here. But I got New England in this one here.
Cody?
My thoughts are almost right in line with Jacob's. In fact, the score I had in my head was the exact same score, but I'll change that just a bit. It just comes down to Tom Brady and the experience he has in big games like this. When the ball's Matty Ice, Schmatty Ice, he hasn't done it on this biggest stage like Tom Brady has consistently throughout his career. I think it's going to be a good game. I think both teams are going to be able to score on each other. Atlanta's defense, of course, isn't great, but what they are is fast and they can tackle. So those little short passes, those little option routes that they like to run with Edelman, I think are going to go for minimal gains. I don't think you're going to see many big plays out of the Patriots side. However, I think scheming for Julio is one thing. Being able to actually execute and stop just a beast of an athlete like him is another whole task. So I think both teams will score. I'm going to go 38-35 New England, and hopefully what's going to come down to, final possession kind of game. And, you can cap off this 2016-2017 NFL season with a good game.
I hope New England gets tossed. Anyway, let's focus on the Super Bowl. I'm so bitter. At this point in your scouting process, and it's awfully early for me, I don't know how far you guys are along. I've made my commitment to the Cheesehead TV draft guide, so at some point I'm going to have to do a real deep dive into a couple position groups. But just so far, where do you feel like the strength in this class is? And I'll go ahead and go first. I really like this class of edge guys. I really like this class of corners. I like this class of running backs. And I like this class of tight ends, which, this really is a great draft for the Packers to have 6 picks in the first 5 rounds. I think that where they are going to need to draft guys, they're going to be guys there to draft. They're going to be above average players for that round and position available. And I really think that this is going to be a great draft for them to load up on talent at the positions that they need. So I'm excited certainly for late April because the fact that the positions that I have a high opinion of match pretty closely with the Packers' needs. It's not like 2014 when they needed a safety. There were 2 safeties. They got one of the 2 safeties. Jacob, what are your thoughts on where this class of athletes is strong?
I think you kind of hit it on the head there. It's a good year for the Packers to have the needs that they do because the class coming in sets up nicely for them. The tight end class is strong. They need one of those whether they bring back Jared Cook or not. The edge rushing class is strong. They need one of those whether they bring back some of those guys, all of those guys, and especially if they bring back none of those guys that are free agents. Defensive back class. We've seen the table at this point of the quarterback rating against of Darius Gunter, Demarius Randall, and Quentin Rollins. You imagine Sam Shields isn't coming back next season. They need another defensive back regardless. It's a good class there. The running back class, I believe, is strong as well. Another one just to throw in there because you didn't say it, and I feel like I need to be a little different, just kind of underrated portion of this class. Is there a Julio Jones in this group? No. But I think that the wide receiver class is actually getting a little under the radar here. I think there's a lot of good players in that group. I don't know if there's, like I said, I don't think there's a Julio Jones in this group, but I think there's a lot of good players in there. We were talking about some guys earlier today in our group message. Just some guys that could go maybe later on in the day, later on in day 2. I think there's a lot of good players in that group as well. But you mentioned it. Some of the Packers' biggest needs, tight end, edge rusher. defensive back, and running back, I mean, that's kind of where this draft is the strongest, and that bodes well for them down the line.
Yeah, there are a couple guys in the receiver class that I like as well. I don't think I have anybody graded as high as I had Julio. I don't think I'll grade anybody as high as I had Amari Cooper. But you're right. I mean, there are the Corey Davises, Mike Williams is the guy that I'll talk about a little bit later, Cooper Kupp. I agree that this might not be the strongest wide receiver class at the top, but that there are a number of guys that are going to be, feature receivers in this league coming out of this group. Cody, what are your thoughts on this group of athletes as a whole? Strong class, weak class, and where is it strong?
Yeah, you guys touched on all of it. I don't want to just sound like an echo chamber here. I will say I think the tight end, at the top, O.J. Howard, David Njoku from Miami. I think we're going to see those two guys at the tight end position absolutely destroy the combine and be highly thought of as some of the best tight ends to come out in probably 5-10 years. O.J. Howard especially, he had a great week at the Senior Bowl. One of us will probably talk about him in a little bit, but I think you look to that position, you haven't had that kind of athlete come out in a while. I think that really just, not only does it have the depth that you want of a tight end class that's been lacking for so long, it also has the studs on top, too, that really make that class just blue chip this year. And the other ones, I do agree with you guys. Some day 2, maybe early day 3 wide receivers are, lurking around, I think, are going to be better than a lot of people are projecting them to be right now. And, of course, the edge rushers, you have a lot of them, many of them projected in the first round, but so many of them, and I think that you end up getting a couple of quality guys on day 2 that, most of the time would probably see their value bumped up as just, got good depth at the top, that some of those guys are going to be around at the beginning of day 2 that I think will, certainly help a team right away. Running backs, it's just such a deep class. You have your 2 at the top that everybody knows about, Fournette and Cook, but I think the depth of this, day 3, you're going to be getting a guy that you could probably rely on to carry the ball 20 times a game. Whether it's you're looking for a third down back to catch the ball and pass protector, if you're looking for the bell cow, there's going to be guys around for you in day 3 that you could, certainly draft and make your roster that much better. So you guys hit on all of them, and like you said, it's a great year to be a Packer fan, and with this type of draft, because it just touches on every position that they could look to address.
Awesome. So the most recent, pre-draft deal that has gone on, pre-draft event, is the Senior Bowl. So we're going to talk about some winners from this week's Senior Bowl. I'll go ahead and go first. Cooper Kupp, Eastern Washington. Most of you listening to this podcast know that I cover North Dakota State football. That is part of the FCS subdivision of Division I football. And Cooper Kupp was probably the best player in that subdivision for the last 3 years. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. The guy was an absolute monster. We talked about him in the old From the Benches group message this morning. I was able to mention some of his totals from his 4 years there. The young man did redshirt, but after he redshirted, in 4 seasons, he caught 428 balls for 6,464 yards and 73 touchdowns in college seasons. Those numbers are literally video game numbers. That is just unbelievable. And then when the kid went up to the to play against the a higher level of competition, if you will, at the Senior Bowl, there was absolutely no question that he was able to compete against those corners and beat those defensive backs just like he beat all the defensive backs in FCS. I think that he'll be underrated because of his age. I think he'll be underrated because of playing in the FCS subdivision, and a guy that I think would be extremely popular in Green Bay and a great fit for the offense. The other one is the other Alabama defensive lineman, Tomlinson. I think that with as much and completely deserved credit as is given to Jonathan Allen, Tomlinson really, to me, looks like a starting caliber defensive line in this league, and is someone that I'm going to be paying attention to his measurements and his testing to see if that's another guy that the Packers want to build with up front, because if you follow what Ted Thompson does, he'll tell you that the good Lord only put so many big people on this earth, and he does like to draft those big people. Cody?
Well, I think I have to start off with the consensus winner, at least among draft community, of Hassan Reddick, linebacker from Temple. Came in very undersized, having played the edge at Temple, but ended up checking in at just over 6'1", 237 pounds. Now, that's still a bit of a tweener size. You can't really rely on him to go against offensive tackles in the NFL consistently. But they asked him to play inside linebacker down at the Senior Bowl, and he just, shined in everything, or getting after the passer and blitzing through A-gaps, and then they had him line up at defense end where he was very natural. He was able to beat the offensive tackles there with inside moves, spin moves, just speed to the outside. He's a guy who was just relentless and all over the field. I think it's fair to say that he's probably raised his stock most amongst any of the prospects down there, so much so that you're seeing his name in first-round mocks now from some of the big boys even. So it's interesting to see that this guy was so productive in college, and he was just kind of a day two hard guy. But you see him against that good competition. That's why those guys go down there and compete during the week, and he really showed out and made himself some money.
Jacob?
Well, the first one I'll start with is kind of sad because he was a bit of a pipe dream before the Senior Bowl started, and now he's definitely a pipe dream now, and that's O.J. Howard, the tight end out of Alabama. I mentioned I wanted him after last year's national championship game where he lit up Clemson and then obviously returned for a senior season and then came back and did it again. But I thought he'd be a perfect complement to Jared Cook for a little while and then eventually become the starting tight end. And then he has a big week at the Senior Bowl and now probably cemented himself as a top 20 pick. As we know, with the magical run-the-table type run, the Packers do not have a top 20 pick anymore. It's unlikely that he slips to 29, but he had a big week, kind of cemented himself as a blocker, pass catcher. I know when you're a pass-catching tight end, you kind of get that thought about you that you're not really willing to block, but O.J. Howard proved over the last 2 years that he is willing to do that as well, with especially a run-heavy team like Alabama. So he proved he could do that. Dropped a couple passes, but made some head-turning grabs to make up for those as well. So O.J. Howard had a big week. The other one had a good week before he got hurt, and that was, and forgive me if I butcher his first name, but that's Tre'Davious White out of LSU. He's a corner. Had another pretty good week in practice. I liked him during the season out at LSU. As far as the senior corners, he's probably one of my favorites. He's up there with guys like Jordan Lewis out of Michigan and a few others. I know you guys are probably surprised that I didn't pick one of the Michigan guys, considering my college football fandom. But Tre'Davious White's a player. He can do some things on the outside as a corner. He's got good size. Could probably play a little man-to-man corner for you and then also be a punt returner. But I thought he had a good week in Senior Bowl practices. Unfortunately, an injury. Hopefully that doesn't affect him for the Combine and then eventually his pro day as well.
One other guy that impressed me quite a bit was Zay Jones, wide receiver from East Carolina. Getting checked in at just over 6'1", almost 6'2", 200 pounds. And from the moment he stepped on the field, he definitely belonged. I mean, this is a guy who caught over 150 passes his senior year. Think about that, 150 passes. Nothing but production from him coming out of Eastern Carolina. He had played up in the slot quite a bit and was more of like an extension of the run game almost, although he did average over 12 yards a catch. The thing with him this week, Senior Bowl, he showed he had no problem on the outside, beating the press. His routes looked sharp. His hands were excellent. And then during the game, he stepped up and made some big plays too. So when the lights were brightest, he came down and played really well. I think he was firmly day two to begin with. I think he did nothing further to hurt himself and certainly bumped himself up a few. I think if a team's looking for a slot receiver with the ability to have the flexibility to put him out wide, I think he showed the teams he's certainly capable of that. He's a guy that fits kind of like what the Packers mold is, so he's someone to keep an eye out on day two if he's lingering out there for Green Bay.
All right, let's take a deep dive into the running back position. First of all, Cody, what round are you looking for Green Bay to potentially take a running back?
Well, we kind of touched on it. I'm not in love with the idea of taking a running back in the first round. Second round, I would be hard-pressed to do that as well. I think in the third round, I could be convinced on taking a running back. Certainly third, fourth, and fifth would be my ideal sweet spot. I think if the right player is lingering out there at the third, in our third round pick at the end of the third, I wouldn't mind pulling the trigger. Of course, we have Ty Montgomery, who's certainly capable of being our every down back. But to get someone in the third round to challenge him to kind of develop our own 1-2 punch in the backfield, depending on whether or not Lacey or Michael come back, I think I could be talked into it. And I'd have to think a lot of Green Bay fans would like the idea of an exciting young back coming in to kind of take over and work off of Montgomery. So third round, I guess, is where I'd be most comfortable. Fourth round would be more ideal if we could address a different position earlier in the third, but third round is what I'll say with it right now.
Yeah, I have no problem with that at all. I would really prefer they stay out of the top 100 picks with a running back. I would actually prefer if they would just re-sign Eddie Lacy, move forward with Montgomery, Lacy. John Crockett's a guy that I really have a high opinion of. I'm not sure if they would want to keep Michael on a small deal and use Montgomery as more of a hybrid player, but I just don't see it as a real serious need. So I'm going to say round 4. I want those top 100 picks to be used in a different way. So just keep, unless it's something crazy where you've got a Christian McCaffery available in round 3, just leave it alone. For me, anyway. Jacob?
I'm with you. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. I have the preference of bringing back Eddie Lacy. Christian Michael, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not real keen on bringing him back. But Ty Montgomery's a running back. I'm fine with bringing him back. Bring back Eddie Lacy on a short deal. And then, I mentioned last year my two favorite running backs, or two of my favorite running backs in the draft last year were Paul Perkins and Jordan Howard. And both of those guys were picked after the top 100 picks. You can get those guys in the 4th and 5th round. That's where I think you can look this year. I mentioned last week for Packers needs, edge rusher, cornerback, and then pass catcher were my top 3 needs, whether that's an outside wide receiver or a tight end. And then that's where running back came in after that. So, if you're using those top 100 picks, I'd like to use that on something else. I think you can find a running back like that, whether it's a replacement eventually for Eddie Lacy if you're getting him on a short-term deal, or, an eventual bell cow, I guess is the right word you want to use, is a guy who could eventually take over as a starter and using Montgomery as your Jonathan Franklin type role. If that's the way you want to look at him moving forward, then that's fine. But I'm with you, Ross. Keep it out of those top 100 picks. Use those guys to build up your defense, build up your weapons around Aaron Rodgers in the passing game. But running backs, like I said, Paul Perkins and Jordan Howard, those guys would have been just fine with me last year. And you got those guys in picks, I think it was 131 and 157 or something along those lines. I'd have to check those numbers to be 100% sure. But it was outside of the top 100 picks and in the 4th and 5th round, respectively.
You keep Jonathan Franklin's name out of your mouth.
I'm sorry.
Where, Jacob, would you like who is your guy then at that round that you're looking for this season?
That would be Mr. Wayne Gallman from Clemson. Another one of those guys. It seemed like all my favorite players from the national championship game in 2015 were. It would have been 2016 then, excuse me, but 2015 college football season, all stayed in school. But he had a good year. Cody mentioned earlier, Cody's got a really good formula for how Ted Thompson picks his running backs. That's something he's dove into, so I'll let him kind of promote that when he gets to his spot. But he really fits those things to a T. But he plays well out of the backfield. He's got a good running style. He's a one-cut type, which is kind of the way the Packers like their running backs to work. But he put a move on in last year's national championship game that just had me jump out of my seat. And it's not very often that I do things like that. I'm usually kind of reserved until the play is over. But that's just not a way that I normally react. So when a running back especially gets me to do that on a play, again, when you do something against Alabama's defense, that to me is a good way to measure how a player reacts against what is essentially an NFL caliber defense year in and year out. Alabama churns out pros every year. They may not necessarily be the best pros, but they have professional caliber players on their defense every year. But Wayne Gallman is a guy I think that could step right in, maybe not pick things up right away in the Packers offense if they have Lacey and Montgomery next year. John Crockett's a guy, Ross, that you mentioned could come back next year. But if he's in a competition with John Crockett as a third running back, eventually, if he was drafted in like the third round, I think he would beat him out. But it's be unfortunate for you. But if you got that guy in there right away, that's a guy I think you could pick him in the fourth or fifth round, be just fine with that, and eventually could take over for Lacey once he moves on past his 1 or 2 year deal.
Yeah, if you guys want to look at a guy where I'm comfortable and who I think is an absolute monster, Cody, you get a chance, do a little bit of a dive into Brian Hill from Wyoming. That's a kid that when I was covering North Dakota State, that staff recruited, probably would have been one of the better backs in school history. That staff actually, or much of that staff, took the job at Wyoming during the third national championship season and went to Wyoming, took Brian Hill as a recruit with them. He started as a true freshman, was a monster. Freshman, sophomore, junior year. I know the Mountain West maybe isn't the highest level of competition in the FBS, but he is an absolute monster. That'd be my favorite guy in that round 4, round 5 area, along with Donnell Pumphrey from San Diego State. That's a player that I really like, but as I'm sure Cody's about to tell us, not really the body type that Ted's looking for in the backfield. So, Cody, who is your back in the round that you are comfortable with taking a back?
Sure. I have watched some Brian Hill. I am a fan as well. I love him in that 4th, 5th round, like you just mentioned. Woo. And so to delve a little bit into that size thing, let's just typically look for anyone 5'11 or taller. Let's look for anybody 215 or bigger. And then once the testing numbers come out, we can kind of even narrow down our some parameters a little bit then too. But, your Pumphrey guy, as great as he is, as dynamic as he is on the field, he looks like a little jitterbug who's just electric, really. He's just never going to happen for Ted Thompson, or just never has happened yet. You should never say never. But, they want a big-body guy who can withstand the pounding. Ty Montgomery's 225. Lacey was 230 plus when he was drafted. Most of the Packers backs that they've drafted are generally going to be over 215. So, in my pipe dream scenario, I guess, when I said the third round I'd be comfortable, Jamal Williams from BYU, he's my third back in this entire draft. However, it just kind of feels like a lot of the big drafts right now aren't as high on him as I am. But if Jamal Williams would somehow fall to the third round for the Green Bay, I'd run to the podium. I think he's that good. He's not, there's unfair comparison to, say, Adrian Peterson, but that kind of running style when you watch him play, slashing, get to the hole skinny, explode through it, put your shoulders down, run behind your pads, break tackles, fall forward, kind of running back, kind of guy that Thompson likes, and almost similar to Starks, a little bit of an upright running style, or Gallman in this year's draft. 4th round, Samaje Perine is a guy who doesn't get talked about a ton at Oklahoma, mostly because his counterpart there, Joe Mixon, was by far the more electric, explosive back, but Perine was nothing to shake a stick at, and he's another guy that I was mentioning, 6 foot, 230 pounds, big guy, got tree trunk thighs, but a little bit more explosive than you might think from a bigger back. However, I just have a feeling, with the depth of this running back class, he could potentially be there in the 4th round, and I wouldn't be bad an eye if they decided to take him there. I think he'd be a great combination with Montgomery in the middle rounds.
Yeah, I have no issue with that as all. So, let's talk briefly. We don't think this is a possibility, but let's get into it anyway. Cody, who is your favorite running back in this class?
Sure. Well, Dalvin Cook and Fournette are my 1 and 2, and I just mentioned Jamal Williams is my number 3. I'm a big fan of his. He's probably my favorite back that I've watched. Another guy that I've liked from watching him is Kareem Hunt, and he had a great week at the Senior Bowl. I was a little disappointed at his weigh-in. I believe he checked in at 208 or 205, so below the parameters of what Thompson generally looks for. But this is a guy who catches a ton of balls in college, can pass protect, gets quickly through the hole, is great at the second level of making guys misses, and has just been a playmaker for almost his whole entire career at Toledo. So he's a guy, another middle round selection. I wouldn't bat an eye if the Packers decided to take, but again, he just falls a little lower on the weight than what Thompson generally goes for. So I'm skeptical that he would be someone to take. But as a mid-round guy, just another guy I like. But my favorite back would be Jamal Williams this year at BYU.
I think my favorite back is still Leonard Fournette. If you can keep him healthy, I think he's got that Zeke Elliott type potential. His size, I really, really like his size. The way that he was the whole show there, and I think really, even though some SEC backs maybe haven't worked out, I think Fournette is that top 5, top 6, top 7 in the whole class level athlete. Guy that will not be playing in Green Bay unless something really, really weird happens. But he's my favorite back in this class. Jacob, who's your favorite guy in this group?
Dalvin Cook from Florida State, and that's no disrespect to Leonard Fournette. I think he's a very good talent as well. But I watched Fournette quite a bit because I try to watch LSU whenever I can. I got a cousin from down south who tells me about LSU players all the time because he's a fan of theirs. But I watched Dalvin Cook play quite a bit this year because Florida State was my national championship pick. That didn't go so well, but watched Dalvin Cook play against Michigan and in the Orange Bowl this year, and watched him split out wide and watched him run right by Jordan Lewis, who I have a ton of respect for as a man-to-man corner. And I watched him do some things in the passing game, watched him do some things in pass pro. And I think this is no disrespect to Leonard Fournette, but I think when you get to this point in the class, you do split hairs a little bit. I've just seen Dalvin Cook do some different things that I haven't, whether by design of LSU's offense or by inability. I'm not 100% sure, but I've seen Dalvin Cook do things in the passing game, whether it's protection or catching the football, that I haven't necessarily seen Fournette do. So, and they're both, I think, really talented runners, but I like Cook just a little bit more than Leonard Fournette.
Fair enough. Jacob, who is your most undervalued guy in this whole class?
Most undervalued guy in the whole class. Wow, that's tough. There's a lot of guys here. Again, it's a deep class, but again, I mean, you're looking at guys like Donnell Pumphrey. I think one of you guys mentioned him earlier. I can't remember who exactly. You're talking about a guy who's going in round 4 or 6 in some mocks. This is a guy I think that could go as high as round 2 or 3. I know his size is what it is, but he's dynamic, and you can only get so many guys like that on the football field. And when you got a guy who, when the ball is in his hands, he can score anytime he touches it, that's a special kind of player. I think that's worth higher than a 6th-round pick. So if you're getting a guy like that in the 6th round that's undervalued, at least in my opinion, for the sake of this question, Donnell Pumphrey is going to be my guy for that answer then.
I'm not going to change my answer from another topic that we discussed. I think it's Brian Hill. I would take, if, I had no players on my team, I had no needs, I had no strengths, I would take Brian Hill in the 3rd round. I really do think that highly of him. Cody, who's your most undervalued running back in this class?
Well, I think a month ago I probably would have told you Alvin Kamara from Tennessee, but it seems that Big Draft has gotten a hold of him, and I've seen him mocked as high as the 1st round. But that is a running back from Tennessee who's absolutely explosive with the ball, catches it tremendously well, does a lot of the things out of the backfield I think the Packers like other running backs. However, he's going to be a little bit smaller. I'm going to go with Dante Foreman. And earlier, right after the season ended, he was kind of a hot name. And now he's just kind of tailed off, and maybe it'll come back as Combine and Pro Days pick up and stuff. But, he's a guy who averaged 6.3 yards a carry and ran for over 2,000 yards this year. I mean, he was just an absolute monster at Texas. Kind of ran out of a set style that would suit the Packers out of the shotgun, wait for the hole to open, and then just kind of pop through the hole. And he's a big guy. He can run through arm tackles in the middle of the field, and it has surprisingly good speed for a back who's listed in the 240s. So I think he could ultimately be a good compliment. And his name just kind of seems to have gone hush now lately. So that's why I'm saying he's a little undervalued, but he's a day 2 pick all day for me.
All right. Last question, and we'll try and keep this same formula as we go through the positions, ladies and gentlemen. But right now I want to know, Our main focus this season is those 6 picks in the first 5 rounds. What is the likelihood that the Packers draft a running back with one of those 6 picks? Cody.
Boy, this is impossible without knowing free agency. So I would say 75%. And I'm with you guys. I want to bring Lacy back on a 1-year deal. Rock with Lacy and Montgomery, and either you have Crockett or some other undrafted free agent you bring in and kind of compete for that 3rd spot. But without knowing if we're going to bring back Lacy or not, and with the depth of this running back class, I think it'd be wise if they drafted one. So I would go 75%.
I'm at the 40 or 50%. I just think that Lacy's a guy that they believe they can get at the price they want to pay for him. So I think he'll be back in green and gold. So I just think that Montgomery's going to change his number. They view him as a running back. That's a pretty nasty 1-2 punch. And then, like I said, I have a ton of respect for John Crockett. I think that the quarterback likes him. I know the backup quarterback likes him as far as the chemistry that he and Hundley have with that second team, whether it's camp or preseason. But I think 40% that there's a back taken in the first 5 rounds there. Jacob?
I mean, without knowing if Eddie Lacy's coming back, I'm with you. I think that he is going to be back on a short-term deal. I think Mike McCarthy mentioned him, again, by name. I know he was asked. He said he wants him back. Doesn't know his health situation, but I don't think that he would have said he wanted him back if he didn't mean that. McCarthy doesn't specifically and explicitly say things that he doesn't mean. So for him to say that, I think says a lot as to how they feel about Lacy. I think that they think they can get him back. So with him likely being back, I'm with you, 45 to 50%. I think they can bring him in, bring Lacy back. They've got Montgomery, and then whether it's Crockett, another undrafted free agent, maybe they bring back Michael. Maybe it's a 6th-round pick from, who knows where state, and they let those guys compete, but whatever it is. But it's tough to see them spending a high pick on a running back if they bring back Lacy. Now, if they don't, then I think your chances get into that 80 to 90% in those first 5 picks, because you almost have to, because you have Montgomery as the only one who's under contract. But if Lacy comes back, which I think that likelihood's above 50%, then yeah, I think you're in about the 45 to 50% range.
All right, well, that'll do it for us, this second episode of the Packers War Room podcast. We'd like to thank you guys all for downloading. Thank you guys all for listening. You can check out my work at Cheesehead TV. You can check out my work at PackersTalk.com. You can check out Cody's work at Cheesehead TV. You can check out Jacob's work at FanRag. And once again, we really appreciate all of you for checking out the Packers War Room podcast.